And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thanks so much for joining us once again. And it is great to have Dr. Sherri Tenpenny back with us once again. It's been a while, which is completely my fault. But Sherri, thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you, and so much to discuss. Obviously, people can find you there at Busy Dr. T. There on the screen, and all the links are in the description. You can follow Sherri on X, on Twitter, and everywhere else she is. But maybe we can start asking you about your latest book. I know it's only been published probably 3 weeks ago. I have not had a copy in the UK here. I will get a copy because I always love the work you do, Sherri. You're a key figure, and you're not part of the central stream. And I think it's so important to listen to many voices on the tyranny that we face in many aspects, but a zero accountability in a failed system, how Big Pharma weaponizes vaccines, public health, and the law. And all the links will be in the description. But maybe I can ask you.
I love the picture. I love the cover. My staff put the cover together, and it's just so ominous, which is kind of the way the book is.
Tell us about it. What brought you to write this book?
Well, actually, it started in the summer of 23 when bird flu was starting to kick up. And I wrote a book back in 2005 called Fowl, Bird Flu is Not What You Think, spelled Fowl. Fowl, Bird Flu is Not What You Think. And I wrote it in real time as it was happening in 2005. And one of my staff members got a hold of that book because it's been out of print for quite a while. And she got hold of the book and she read it and she said, "This is so good. You need to just re-release this." And so I have a PDF file of it, and I was looking through it and I thought, there's good stuff in here, but it's a 20-year-old information. And it was a lot of political things that I wrote about Bush, Bush 2 and his policies and what was going on with the government. So I said to my staff, I said, I can't do that. I mean, I just can't re-release it. And Jackie said, "Well, then you need to rewrite it." And I said, "Well, okay." And so I said, "But you have to understand that if I take this project on, it's going to be a big project, and I won't be able to do much else in that time, because when you write a book, it sort of takes on a life of its own." So I started with the bird flu of 2020, the bird flu of 2005, and kind of compared it to what was happening with bird flu of 2023. And then as I dug into the history, back into it again, how long bird flu has been around since the 1800s, and all of the different things that happened during the Bush era of Tamiflu and the PrEP Act that was developed at that period of time, which gives them even more liability protection than the 1986 Act did. And as I started going through and kind of laying out the history, a couple of the chapters just really took over when I started talking about sacrificed for the greater good and the 40-year march to 2030, and started talking about the Healthy People program that here in the United States, how it completely corrupted and co-opted our medical system, and it took us into the international realm of vaccination. I dig down through Gavi and talk about all the international vaccination problems. And then I talk about, the weaponization of our healthcare. And that started with the Healthy People program and the electronic medical records that then co-opted into Medicare. And Medicare is a really hot item here in the U.S., and people don't really understand it. And they think that it's just another insurance that the government pays for, and it's so much more than that, and so much more nefarious than that. And when I started looking at the covered countermeasure injury compensation program that was actually put together in 2005, and I saw that all the people who've been injured and all the people that have died from the COVID jabs are going to be completely thrown underneath the bus. There is no way that they are going to get any compensation or any look-see to that. And it was pretty interesting, Pete, because, I've been doing all things vaccine for 25 years. I mean, seriously, the only time, the only time I'm not reading about it, investigating it, and talking about it is when I'm asleep. And when I stumbled into that program and into the bowels of that CIC program, I was infuriated. And I was like, how did I miss this? How did I not know about how bad this was? If I didn't know about it, and Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, who wrote the foreword to the book, and she and I just were talking the other day, and she said, I didn't know about that either. So here's two people who live their life informing people about problems associated with vaccines and really didn't even really know about this completely horrible covered countermeasure injury compensation program, which is CICP for short. If we didn't know about it, it's no wonder that the general public didn't know about it. And the general public, when they got injured, they filed a VAERS report. 1.6 million people filed an injury report with the VAERS program, but that's the wrong place to file a complaint. And I say in the book, and I talk about the fact that it would be like if you went to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles here in the U.S., is where you get your driver's license, and you tried to get a plane ticket. They both have to do with transportation, but you're in the wrong agency. You can't get a plane ticket at the place you go to get a driver's license. Well, you can't get compensation if you filed an injury claim with VAERS. And the timeline is only a year. You have 1 year to file it. There are incredibly horrible caps, like only $50,000 lifetime total for missed times off of work. They don't pay for your lawyer fees. They don't pay for anything. And as of last time I looked at that program was maybe 3 weeks ago. They had only adjudicated 40 claims, 40. And they actually have them listed and how much they were paid. And there's one claim for a blood clotting disorder that paid like $2.3 million. Then there's another claim that paid $370,000. And if you throw those two out, those two high-end claims as outliers, you take those two out and average the remaining 38 claims, the average payout was $4,000. So these people are terribly injured, have thousands and thousands of dollars of medical bills. A lot of them can never work. There were no death claims that have been paid at all, and it's just horrible. And so the section in the book that talks about that, the chapter is called "Sacrificed for the Greater Good," and because that's what it kind of is. And so those three chapters are really of the book that I've written that I wrote about. Nobody else really has talked about very much. And so I brought out, new information. I also took a really deep dive into the vaccine adjuvants and why they started adding adjuvants to the flu shots, which came out of bird flu in 2005, because they didn't have enough antigen to generate an antibody response. And it took 9 times more antigen to get an antibody response out of bird flu. So they said, well, we'll just throw some junk in there. We'll just call it the adjuvants and we'll do that. So, I mean, it's really, really, and I talk about quarantines, the Tamiflu, kind of a summary of the vaccine injury of the vaccine industry, talk about human and animal cell lines and how they, are so rotten for our system. And I talk about a lot of really stuff that people probably don't know. And if you like my writing style, I write really conversationally, so it's easy to read. It's just not like a big list of facts. But the best chapter in the book really is chapter 19, which is tying it all together, the activist playbook. So after we lay out this big, messy bunch of junk that they've done to us over the last 20 years, and they use what they did in bird flu, they've used it as a template. The first template started to come together in 1976 during the swine flu thing. Now, the difference is in 1976, after they had 50 deaths and about 150 people who had Guillain-Barré syndrome, they pulled the program within 6 weeks. They stopped it. Now we've got millions of deaths. I had read in the expose at one point in time, this was maybe a year ago, that they estimated 2.1 billion people have been injured, and it's probably more than that. And yet we still have this horrible product on the market. Doctors and nurses are still giving it. They are injecting pregnant women and babies as young as 6 months of age with a product that is deadly. And they started this whole national vaccination program in 1976, pulled it off the market, fell back, regrouped, did the first round of SARS in 2002. Then they did the bird flu stuff in 2005, and they've created a template. It's a template that and I talk about the marketing of it and how they set the whole template up. I talk about that in the book. That they can just turn the crank anytime they want. And now they've learned how to weaponize fear because people have been so fearful. So I'm hoping that when people see this, when they read the book, and I've had really good responses. It's only been out for about 3 weeks. And had really people who have read it said, I just can barely put it down. It reads like a suspense thriller. And so it's been really, really good. And when people go through it, once you know what you know, you can't unknow it. And one of the main reasons I wrote the book was so that, I think a lot of people became aware and awake during COVID, but they still don't understand, if that was their first intro and their first investigation into the vaccine world. They don't really know what happened in the last 20 years that got us to this point, because it didn't just happen with Event 201. It had been planned 25 years ago. And so I try to lay it out so that people can see that this is a long-term plan, and it's just like they are goose stepping forward. But if we know what we know, then we can stop it, and we can just say, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, that ain't going to happen. And I'm not going to be injected with their stuff. I don't care what the pandemic treaty thing is that they're still trying to put into place. They're still voting on it. I think it's next month. They're still going to vote on it again to try to get everybody, the whole world, in lockstep with the fear of the invisible, the big boogeyman. And I'm hoping that this book will lay the groundwork that people will see it and go, no. It's not, they're not doing this. There's a whole chapter on surveillance, and they're not going to do this again to us. They're just not going to do it. All the AI stuff is not cool. It's not cool. I mean, there are certain elements of AI that are okay because they're very time consuming, or they save you a lot of time. Like I use the AI, when I use ChatGPT, I'm usually looking for like a date. Like what year did this happen, or, who were the 3 people involved with this treaty? So it's a whole lot faster than Google. And usually you get a pretty straight answer. Sometimes though, when I've asked it vaccine questions, I've said, that's not correct. And they'll go, and ChatGPT says, oh, I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right. Let me try again. It's like a weird sort of conversation you're having with a piece of software, But that's the downside, because if you don't know enough to tell it that wasn't right, and you just assume that it was, you could be really educated incorrectly. But it is a lot faster, and I use it as an editor. Like if I write, when I'm writing my Substacks, or when I've written a book, I'll write a paragraph and then I'll stick it into ChatGPT and I'll say, make this stronger, check the grammar or whatever. So it's there are elements of AI that are good, but there are certainly much, much more elements of AI that are very nefarious.
No, there are a lot of parts to it, and I've seen people talk about Grok, putting stuff into Grok and telling them how the jab is wonderful and how COVID was an issue. And so that narrative that's pushed out is often interesting, and the privacy issue is huge. And that's a whole other section, and I share your concern, Sherri, on that. But can I ask you, I had a conversation with a friend today, just an hour before we recorded this, and they were saying their father has been encouraged to go and get a booster. He had a jab, caused lots of blood clots, then realized there was something wrong, so went on it against the advice of his children. We all learn it sometime or other. We pray this earlier rather than later, but whatever it is. And he obviously doesn't want to get this, and he's been told you need to get it by the end of the month. And obviously there's an incentive by the end of the month. I mean, what is it? That's the UK, but what is it in the US? I assume there's still incentives for doctors to still carry out jabbing.
There might be. I don't work in a hospital system, so I don't really know how that works. I know that they are not the same as they were during COVID, that people got tens of thousands of dollars when they had fully vaccinated people, a cadre of patients in their practice. But it's, the people that I talk to and the world that I live in, people just are doing everything they can over here. In fact, there's a petition out now that it has 18,000 physicians that have signed it to stop the mRNA platforms completely, and they've sent it up to Senator Johnson and a few other people. Now, 18,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but there are about, right or plus or minus a little bit, about 100,000 physicians in the U.S. So that's about 18%. So, I mean, that's a pretty sizable number. And those are at least the ones that had seen the survey. I mean, I'm assuming there's a huge cadre of physicians that don't even know that survey exists that would gladly sign it if they had an opportunity to. Because I don't think that there's any physicians out there now, unless they are so completely brainwashed that they're never going to see anything other than what the pharmaceutical industry says is good. But I don't think there's anybody in America that doesn't know somebody who's been either injured or died from these shots. I have a friend that's been to 207 funerals of people that have died from the shot. Either it was somebody that he knew, or the spouse of somebody he knew, or a child of somebody he knew, or a friend of a friend, sort of thing. So 207, and he's still going to about 2 funerals a week. And when he got to 175, he told me he was going to stop counting. Well, obviously he didn't, because he told me. But I mean, think about that. Think about the ripple effect of 207 people in your relative circles that and how that's disrupted their family, their workplace, tax revenues, what's happened to their children. I mean, what they have done to us, and it's not going to stop. There was a study that came out maybe 3 months ago now from the CDC that says we're pretty sure you're going to have to look back over your shoulder at least 15 years before you can say that I got the shot and I'm just fine. And I kind of paraphrase that, but then that's really in essence what it says. And the infertility, the fertility rates are dropping like a rock all over the world. They just released a report in the last week here in the U.S. that the fertility rates are the lowest ever in the history of when they've been looking at them. And we're below a replacement now. And Greece is this was probably 2 years ago, that their fertility rate was so low, they were concerned that Greeks as a nationality are in one more generation are going to cease to exist. And so we know that the spike protein has a predilection for ovaries and testicles, and so we are now in. I did a webinar on Saturday morning with Dr. Kimberly Biss, who's published a lot of papers, and she was talking about how that we were just talking about reproductive health. And she said, when a baby girl is born, she has about 6 million eggs, and that's all she's going to get. That's all she's going to get ever. It's unlike men that continue to make sperm. When a little baby girl is born, her ovaries are packed, and that is all she's going to get. And by the time she gets to the reproductive age in her 20s, mid-20s, when she's wanting to conceive and have children, those eggs have gone down to about 300,000. And then as you get older, the amount of viable eggs gets less. And then, when you get to be 50, you go through menopause and you don't make any at all anymore, or have any ovulation. And we were both talking about, what is this going to do, that when we're now giving COVID jabs to pregnant women, and we're giving COVID jabs starting at 6 months of age. And we know that the spike protein in those COVID shots go to the testicles and the ovaries. So if you're giving this to a little girl, what is that going to do to the amount of eggs that she's going to be able to have by the time she gets into her 20s and 30s and wants to have children? And Kim said, she goes, it's a question that we talk about a lot for those people that are still getting jabs and wanting to jab their children. I mean, she said, there's no way of knowing until 20 years from now when people can't get pregnant anymore.
No, it's frightening, and we've seen. I've had discussions with different doctors, some who get it, and some who still are blinded by that brainwashing that's been put on them. But I saw a post from you on X a few days ago. You had retweeted. It was a clip that you had put out, and this was calling for Nuremberg 2.0 trial soon. And you were talking about the European Court of Justice ruling that doctors who push the COVID injections are criminally and civilly liable for the consequences because they were free to refuse. And everyone was free to refuse. There were consequences from above, but you still had the freedom to do what you felt was right. That may have implications on your work life, that may have implications on your career, but as a human being, you weren't being thrown in jail, you weren't being killed if actually refused to participate. It was an impact on your employment. But how do you see that develop? It's an interesting development in Europe that seems to refuse to accept the impact of the jabs. But that European Court of Justice ruling, and of course the conversations in the US with RFK, with Jay Bhattacharya, how do you see this moving ahead? Will we get justice? Because my line is doctors were the tool of the state. They were the ones that actually gave the poison. Without the doctors actually giving it, then people would not have died because they were the tools. So how do you see this developing, this awakening?
Well, if I could wave a magic wand and somebody would die and make me God, and Lord, I didn't mean that sacrilegiously. It just
If we were alive, we would look at the comments now and bring them in, but we're not. We're doing this a day before.
Euphemistically, if suddenly I was in charge and I was the boss and I could do whatever I wanted, I would yank all of their licenses and just unemploy them, because that is the biggest thing that physicians are terrified of, losing their paycheck, and second of all, losing their job. Because what else are they trained to do? I mean, most of them don't even know how to mow their yard or change a leaky faucet, And so it's not like they could go out and get a job as a plumber or an electrician. There's a few that probably can, but the majority can't or won't or whatever. So, but I'm really hopeful, still hopeful, not as hopeful as I was maybe, that we will at some point see accountability for this disaster. It's just shocking to me, with all of the charges and all of the things against him, why Fauci's still out there walking around. And I would say Fauci et al. I mean, this thing that just came out from the White House like a couple of weeks ago that summarized everything about EcoHealth and the gain of function stuff that was happening here in the U.S. and funding. I mean, it's, and then there's evidence. That's evidence of the crime right there. And then you look at Naomi Wolf's book, The Pfizer Papers, which is, she and Amy Kelly crunched 450,000 pages and put it into this. And if you haven't seen the book, for the listener, if you haven't seen the book, it's a little oversized. It's not just like a 8.5 by 11. It's an oversized, heavy book. Uses heavy paper because it's got copies of pathology slides and copies of MRIs and all these sorts of things that it's been all sorted out. And it is an absolutely, I mean, it's like you could walk into a courtroom and say, Your Honor, Exhibit 1, case closed, because you have everything that you can possibly see in terms of how criminal this whole enterprise was and how they knew. Absolutely. And Naomi had said, and I've heard her on a couple of interviews say, the reason that they didn't put infertility down as a side effect is because that's what they were looking for. They were looking to cause it. She said it's sort of like if you're doing a trial drug and the drug is for high blood pressure, and it lowers your blood pressure, that's not a side effect. That's the intent of the drug. And so, if the intent of this shot was to cause infertility, they don't put that down as a side effect. And she said it's just so criminal, between that and, all the work that Ed Dowd's done, of all the graphs and charts and all the stuff. There's so much criminal evidence out there to put these people up, for fraud, for lying, for treason, for breaking laws. I mean, when does somebody finally take action and get it done? And that's the part that's just, I don't know. I don't know what the right word is. Discouraging, infuriating, all of the above. It's just, these people have murdered millions of people around the world, and they just go on to the new World Health Organization treaty and get ready to do it again. When does it stop? And the only way it's going to stop, for the most part, now this doesn't bring justice to the people that were injured or died, and it doesn't put those people behind the bars. But if the world will wake up, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, Zero Accountability, to the criminal aspects of what they've done, and said, you're not doing this again. We're not putting on a mask. We're not shutting down our businesses. This social distancing was nonsense. We're not doing that again. And we're not taking an experimental shot in our arm or putting it in our children just because you said so. We're not doing that.
No, we've had Ed on numerous times, with Naomi on a lot. We've had Amy on before, and all the work they are all doing, and those Pfizer papers are phenomenal. But you maybe looking from the outside in, from outside the US looking in, and we look to the US to set the agenda in many ways. And it does seem to be that there is a desire to actually get to the bottom, to actually take apart the industry, the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry. So to me, there does seem to be a lot happening there. That may be seen things through rose-tinted spectacles. I don't know. But certainly that's how I see it from the outside looking in, that there is a lot of positive moves. It may not be happening as quick as we would like, but certainly there are good people in positions that want to actually change how those industries work.
Well, I agree. With Secretary Kennedy now, I think that people have to keep this in mind, and I have to remind myself of this almost every day. I think it's sometime this week is going to be 100 days that Trump's been in office. 100 days. It's just a little over 3 months. And so Bobby Kennedy's been there just a little over 2 months, 60 days. And they only work 5 days a week, even though they probably have stuff that's going on weekends and stuff like that. But look at the tidal wave of things that have moved. My biggest concern is that unless they codify some of these things into law and make them permanent changes, that they'll do all of this work. They'll clean up our food, clean up the environment. I just read today that in Florida, they now have a hotline set up for people to report chemtrails, and that they're going to be arresting these pilots, and they have up to, it's like putting them in jail for 5 years or something like that. I may not quite have that right, but they do have a hotline that's available now in Florida to report it. So it's no longer a conspiracy theory. It is a absolute fact, to where governments are trying to pass laws to stop this. That's been going on for how long? And so unless they can codify it into law, because think about the changes that Trump made when he was in office the first time. A lot of things that, changed regulations and changed all sorts of things. And then as soon as he left, Biden went in and took all the executive orders and just negated and took it out. So that's, and when I look around the world, most governments have longevity. Like Putin's been there, 30 years, maybe longer, and President Xi in China has just declared himself a permanent, president until he dies. And, a lot of the governments, they have longevity. And so sometimes I think that other countries look at the US and go, all right, we'll put up with your tariff stuff and we'll do all that stuff because we know it's only a short-term thing. And as soon as you're gone, we can get back to business here. That's my concern, because I don't know who's coming along behind Trump that will continue the policies that and the changes he's trying to make economically and financially. And I mean, I listened to a Senate hearing about a week ago about the amount of real estate that the U.S. government owns. It's staggering. It's thousands and thousands of buildings that they own. And that's one of the ways, I guess, the government makes money is they rent out these buildings, I guess. But many of them are just sitting empty. Huge buildings that we have to pay property taxes on, and taxes from city and jurisdictional, state, and and all this stuff. They're just sitting there. It's like, why is the government owning real estate? And so they're changing a lot of things, but it can just as easily change back. And I think about when Queen Elizabeth was alive, in your country, how many American presidents had she seen in her tenure? Like 12 or something like that. There was a lot that she had seen, but she had been the steady Eddie for the British Empire and had seen all these people come and go. And I read somewhere that she said something about, yes, it's another American president. And so there's good and bad in it. I think if all of the cuts that they're making, I think are great. All of the fat is going away, but it can just as easily come back.
Yeah, and you mentioned that stability, and that's now gone on the UK, and that's a whole other issue, and especially I think the Christian ethos and basis that Queen Elizabeth brought to the nation. I really want to ask you about that before we finish up, because I have really enjoyed not only your honesty and your engagement on this issue and your fearlessness to talk about the effects of this control across the board, not only in the jobs but in so many areas. But there's also been another area that has really intrigued me as a Brit, that I'm told I should wear my faith privately, and then I meet Americans and they wear their faith on the sleeves and are bold about their Christian faith and why it is important. And that is about your regular times, especially your Tenpenny walk with God, and the many people you bring on to discuss what is happening through a Christian lens. And that is not something that we are used to in the UK. And I think that's something that I look at and wish that we had in the UK, we had in Europe. And if we had that, maybe we wouldn't have had the collapse of our societies because the rejection of truth. And you in the US still hold on to that understanding of what truth is. It is under attack in many ways, but you still have that ethos and that foundation. So I would love to ask you about that, because the Tenpenny walks with God, that is a active decision. It doesn't just happen. And I've looked at having Christian leaders on regularly on Hearts of Oak, and that hasn't happened as yet. But you've done this week in, week out. Tell us a little bit about that and why that is important to have Christian leaders share their faith and what Christianity really means to these issues.
Well, thank you for asking me that, because most people don't. And I really thank you for bringing that up, because it's an important topic. I grew up in a very Christian family. In my 30s, turned my back on all of it and got really into all the new agey stuff, crystals and astrology.
I grew up as a pastor's kid, so I get it. Baptist church pastor's kid, so I'm with you.
Yeah, so I walked away from all of it. And then 1/1/2020, I was coming home from St. Thomas. I'd been down there on a vacation, and I just was totally moved by the Holy Spirit and said, okay, Lord, I'm all in. I forgive my past. I'm going to dedicate my life to you, and whatever you want me to do, I'm all in. And that was 1/1/2020. In March of 2020, the world exploded. So he had me kind of set up for that. And when I remember I was sitting at my desk, like where I am now, and I was right over there is the television, and I was watching, the daily parade, of Fauci and Birx and Trump and, doing all their things. And I just looked at it and I said, Lord, what do you want me to do with that? This is just nonsense. What do you want me to do with that? And I heard him say out loud to me in my spirit, he said, carpet bomb the neighborhood. I said, okay, what does that mean? So I knew carpet bomb was a military term, but I looked it up. It means to disseminate in the military, it's bombs, but from a Christian perspective, disseminate the message as far and as broad and as deep and as fast as you can. So I called Michelle, my assistant, and I said, well, buckle up, Buttercup. It's going to be quite a ride. And so we just went on the rampage to do that. And then I was about around that time, maybe by June, I had said to Michelle, I said, things are so dark. We need to do something happy. She said, okay, let's have a happy hour. And so she was thinking like we would have a glass of wine and we all get together. And I was like, yes, you're right. A happy hour. We need to get people together to pray. That's what we really need to do. And I thought, the Lord was really nudging at me to start kind of an online Bible study. And I said, I don't know how to do that. I've never even been in a Bible study. I don't know how to lead one. I've never even been in one. And so, and then, in the Bible, it says, when you're called up in front of people, don't be afraid. The Lord will tell you what to say. It's like, well, all right. So, then I was like, I don't know, do I really want to do this very publicly? And then there's a verse in the Bible that says, if you will not declare me before men, I will not declare you before the Father in heaven. And that just haunted me. That haunted me for a couple of weeks. I mean, if I'm not willing to talk about God and the Bible and all these different things, then in front of whoever's willing to listen, I want the Lord to declare me before the Father in heaven. And that's how it all got started. And so when I say that back to you, it's like, just keep those words in mind. God will give you the words to say. He'll bring you the right guests. We've been doing happy hour. When I first started it was 5 nights a week. And we did it for five nights a week. And then after about 6 months or a year of that, it really, with all the other things that I'm responsible for, it just got to be too much. So we cut it back to 3 nights a week. And now it's 1 night a week. It's 1 day a week. It's on Tuesday at 11 a.m. Happy Hour with Dr. T, that I do interviews with great guests, usually authors, but sometimes Christian businessmen and women, sometimes pastors, that we get together and have a conversation like you and I are having now. And then on Thursdays, we do deep dive Bible study that I'll take one of the guests that have really great books, and we'll do a series of 4 lessons in there. And the one that are coming up for the month of May is with Pastor Chuck Chrismeyer. Over the top good, unbelievable. I just finished the recordings of those yesterday, and the part 3 of that 4-part recording is on his book, or the whole thing is on his book, King of the Mountain. In part 3, he really goes deep into the connections between the Vatican and Jerusalem. And it was just blew me away. Stuff that I really didn't know. He's an interesting man, really cool guy. He started out as a school teacher, and then he became a trial lawyer. And he was a very successful trial lawyer for 20 years. And God called him to be a pastor in 1992. And he said, you need to plead the case in front of the church and not in front of a judge. And so since 92, he's been a radio guy and a pastor and a speaker and a writer. He's a really prolific writer. He's written a lot of books. And so Thursday at 11 o'clock, we have those deep dives, and there's some of them are really, 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 really good. And so it's just you gotta be bold in your faith. And the Lord calls us to be bold in our faith. And when you go through the book of Acts in the Bible, and you see all what the early disciples did, and they were beaten and flogged and stoned to death and all these different things for the sake of the gospel, I think we can say a few words for the sake of Jesus and getting the word out there.
So man, and that if you deny me before men, I'll deny before my Father, stuck with you. And to me, the one that stuck with me is Jesus at his trial. And the line is when Pontius Pilate says, "You are a king," and he says, "You say I'm a king. In fact," I just got on my screen, "I am the king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And then Pilate gives that phrase, truth. What is truth? And that is, to me, that's been something that stuck with me throughout the COVID tyranny, that what is truth? And that's what society has lost. And if only they understood who Jesus was, who is the truth, and understood what the Bible teaches. So to me, what you're doing is essential, is important, and bringing people back to that, on that fundamental basis of actually what is truth, because society's completely lost that.
Yeah, and then I write, I do those podcasts on Tuesday and Thursday, and then on Sunday I write a Substack it's called Tenpenny Walking with God, and that's kind of my give back. That I talk about, I don't know, just little stories. And actually I wrote a book about that, a compilation of a lot. It's called Tenpenny Walking with God. It's a compilation of a lot of my Substacks. And the way that if you get that book, the way to use that book is really to just go down the table of contents and find something, an inspiration that you want for the day, like laughter and joy, my hope is in the Lord, the depth of God's love, why we pray, and then just flip over to the thing. And it's usually just a little story. It's a Bible verse, a little story, and a prayer. So each chapter is maybe 2-3 pages long. You could sit down and read the whole thing cover to cover like the other book, but it's kind of meant to be just an inspirational guide for that book. We just have to do it, because if you live to be 120, it's an old age here in this body, but it's a nanosecond of an eternity. So where do you build up your treasure? Do you build up your treasure with God and do all the things that he promotes you to do, and you think about what he's done for us? I guess we can be a little loud for him.
Now, where do you spend eternity? That is the key question that resonates throughout history.
Yes,
and
exactly.
One we need to answer today. Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, I always love having you on. And as I said, not only your perspective and understanding and expertise and enlightenment on the COVID tyranny, but how you bring faith into it in your relationship with God. And I think that is so important. So thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your thoughts on all of those.
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for asking that question. Like I said, I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the listeners for being here.
As an interviewer, that's the best thing. Saying no one's ever asked that, and that's what I love, bringing out something a little bit different. So
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your Christian faith on that. It's enlightening. So thank you, Sherri.
Thank you.